Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, I have an accident to showcase. This video was not planned, it was just kind of all of a sudden. A friend of mine, Rain, and I were working on some last Epoch theory crafting together, and we stumbled upon a completely new minion build, Spectre Necromancer. This was hidden at the time, and I couldn't really find anyone else documenting this build. So I decided it's just my turn to dig up through new territory and try to find something new. So I decided to make a new acolyte, level her up, and try blood specters out. And I fell in love. This is a build that can be started next patch, and it's being buffed in a few ways. But this is definitely more experimental than other builds I have tried, so I just want to warn you here that this build might not be the best in endgame, mainly because it's a minion melee build. But minion melee builds for Acolyte are being buffed next patch for reasons I'll explain later, so this should end up being a lot stronger in 0.9, even on little to no items like the footage you're seeing now. If you end up enjoying the content or learning something new, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as videos like this one take a long time, and I've stayed up all night playing this just to get it up to speed and to get it out to you guys. So it's all appreciated. With the intro out of the way, we can talk details again. How does the build work? Sacrifice is our main skill. There is a sub-skill inside of it called Blood Spectre. There are technically blood wraiths in the game code, which is relevant later, but they were renamed to blood specters. You can summon them by sacrificing minions, and they cost a bit of mana per summon. They're pretty decent melee minions with really good stats and some big fat more damage percent multipliers on them, which is something that is a rarity in Minion Land. Now, one of the biggest problems that we were having with the build was just summoning the minions, as you need to sacrifice your minions and then, of course, pay the mana cost for the minions each minion summoned, right? So we finally figured that out. We're using, of course, the skeleton loop with the mana stuff on death, and of course, we're triggering sacrifice on transplant, which means that we don't have to actually spend the mana on sacrifice. We're only spending the mana on the minions, which is great. That makes it a lot easier. So that's essentially what we're doing here. I'll explain more of that when I get into the explanation part of the video. Now, you must be wondering, why are you playing melee minions, Dread? Don't they suck? Yes, they do in 0.8.5, but thankfully next patch, they're getting fixed slightly. At least wraiths are. And yes, the blood specters count as blood wraiths for this. This means that your wraiths will stick to a target till either the enemy dies or a minion or your minion dies. This is a huge amount of quality of life for this build, as one of the most annoying things is trying to dodge enemy attacks and have your wraiths disengage from enemies because you walk too far away. Hopefully, this is enough to remove some of the melee clunk that exists with the build. Also, there are going to be a bunch of performance updates, so you won't lose as much FPS having 30 plus minions on the screen as well. So now that the big question is answered, we can get into the small things. We're doing ailments with the blood specters, with poison and bleed being our focus. Why is that? Because base crit is non-existent for blood specters, we only have the base 5%. So the only option we have to scale damage in an efficient way is ailments. But it's okay, because not only do blood specters get 200% bleed chance for free, we also can abuse minion poison. One of the best things about next patch is minion ailments are not being hit as hard as player ailments, mainly because there were not as many sources of poison effect, poison pen, bleed effect, or bleed pen. So all of these changes are essentially nothing for them. It's the same thing. There are some sources of bleed pen now on the helmet and chest for Acolyte, but enough of the change to matter, as minions didn't really get much pen anyway, so it didn't really matter. The only change that actually matters is the poison shred being capped to 30 for poison. This doesn't matter all that much for two reasons. One, the amount of damage you were getting before was overkill anyways. And two, they buffed minion poison a bit. It went from 20 flat to 28 flat, so it's just going to be a little bit stronger. They also fixed slash buffed Aura of Decay. Aura of Decay has a node in it where it gave nearby allies or minions 150% more poison damage, but this was bugged and it was only giving increased damage. Now it's going to give 75% more poison damage, so not only the base damage was buffed, you also get a fat 75% more damage modifier on it, which will make the base damage and the ailment just have a much higher floor and they'll work much easier, but with a slightly less high ceiling, which is perfect for the build because we want it to be as smooth as possible and we have enough single target anyways because we're a minion build, right? All right, I've talked about the build enough. Let's go in game so I can show you the exact details, shall I? All right, here we are in game with the build. So the overall concept, what we do is we have sacrifice set up with blood specter, and when we have crimson horror allocated, we always summon a blood specter, which is great. Now, this costs a lot of mana to maintain, so we utilize the loop of summon skeleton with mind catcher, empty the graves, and then we use transplant and sacrifice from transfusion here, which means I can summon 6 minions. I transplant on them, and it'll summon 6 minions for me, which is great. Now, one thing I'd like to note before we get into the build overall, this node here, it's changing. It's going to be 1 point for 2 chains, and then each point after that, there's going to be a new node here. You'll see it in the planner. That'll be 1 chain per yada yada yada. So you are going to have to actually invest into a +2 sacrifice chest eventually to make it feel good. But until you get that, I'll just take 1 point out of Hemophage and 1 point out of Bloodweaver, and you'll be fine until you get a +2 sacrifice chest. Or you can use whatever else, physical, plus dispel, whatever you gotta do to do that, right? You should be fine. It's not like the biggest deal ever, right? Yeah, let's just talk about skills first, shall we? So for sacrifice here, we take 1 point travel in Temple of Ah, 1 point travel in Necrotic Audience, then 3 points in the Catalyst of Aura. Eventually, like I said, we'll have extra points here. This makes it so sacrifice is recast to enemies. Recast multiple times on your minions. This makes sacrifice cost a lot of mana, and it's still going to make sacrifice cost a lot of mana next patch, but we get to cast it for free because transplant casts it for free, which is wonderful. Then we take 2 points into Pontifex for travel, 1 point into Blood Spectre, so this just enables Blood Spectre. Then 3 points into Hemophage. This leech is percentage health leech, meaning that it's all their damage. So it's their dots, their hits, everything. So 75% of all their damage is Leech's life. And of course, we have 100% increased minion leech from River of Bones, meaning that as long as our minions are attacking, they're essentially immortal as long as they don't, of course, get one shot. Now, of course, they have a ticking amount of degen like all wraiths do, but they can survive for a very long time with this node, which is great. Then we take 5 points into Bloodweaver, as Bloodweaver gives us a bunch of extra bleed chance, and it minus the mana cost on Blood Specters a bit. So now it's just 15 mana instead of 25 mana because the 15 plus 10, right? So that's really cool. That helps a lot. That's wonderful. Then 3 points into From Blood. Eventually, if you had like a +3 to sacrifice, you'd add an extra point in this, and this is really cool. And then 1 node into Crimson Horror, which is another big amount, makes specters bigger, and it gives them more health and more damage, which is great. So this is the Blood Spectre. They're a melee minion. They look really sick, by the way. Now, one problem with them is they are melee minions. So what I have done is I have actually allocated a minion attack with change input. I took off right click as one of the buttons and I put it down here, right mouse button for minion attack command. This makes it so that when you're in the mono, right, you can kind of command your wraiths around with easier convenience, right? You can just click on an enemy and they'll go and attack that enemy, right? So overall, that's really good. I like that. That's a cool thing, right? Great. Now, if you wanted to see what the DPS of this build looked like real quick before we get into this here, the damage is there essentially, right? And I also want to talk about another problem with the build. So as you can tell, our blood specters are very big. And that means that they kind of like sit on the target a little bit, if that makes sense. One of the biggest problems is they're kind of too big. So there is kind of a limit to how many blood specters we can, of course, summon, but it's fine. As you can tell, we're doing plenty of damage. 200k DPS, a level 81 character in solo that just got to empowered monos. That's very good DPS for day one progress, which is cool. So yeah, definitely at 20, it kind of gets a little bit crazy. So you don't need more than 20 essentially. Now for Summon Skeleton, TLDR, we just need +1 here for the skeletons. The three nodes in the mana gain when they die. The 2 nodes here so that you summon 3 of them at a time. So you take 2 casts, get to 6 skeletons. So you sacrifice all 6 for blood specters for maximum efficiency. And then 1 point into Mightier Than the Sword, which removes warriors. The reason why that is because sacrifice can still sacrifice your blood specters. So you want to keep your blood specters away from your sacrifice at all times. So they are melee minions. So what will happen is since they're melee minions, they will go and attack the target, right? While your archers are over here. So if we hover over these minions, they will get consumed first. It will go by priority of where your cursor is and where you transplant. So keeping your minions away is great. And that's why we have skeleton archers. It's just so that they don't go and run up against the enemy, which is great. Now, we don't grab any other points. That's mainly because this node, we don't want more than 6 skeletons because if we have more, it gets a little messy if we're trying to like put dread shade on our minions and we accidentally put it on a archer, which is useless for us, right? Stuff like that. So all of that combined, that's great. Don't put points into other extra. Don't put points into immortal either. It kind of fucks up your combo. Now transplant here, transplant's getting changed a little bit. This node's being changed to only 15% coal. That's why I only have 3 points in it to obviously replicate that. I have 3 points into Acolyte's Fervor. This is going to be 3 seconds of haste and frenzy. It's actually going to be better for us because we actually like the haste because being able to move. Essentially, we're spamming cooldown for transplant so that we can actually have 100% uptime on the haste buff, which is great. That's cool. This is not getting changed and this is not getting changed. Now, right now, this is increased minion damage, but this will be changed to flat minion damage for melee attacks, which is useless for our ailment setup, which is fine. That's why I'm not taking this. Now, Dreadshade, we of course take the usual meta setup. The only difference with this part of Dreadshade is we're actually grabbing Vile Ghast to turn all of this into poison chance because we want to do more poison damage. And of course, we also want to do increased poison damage as well. So it just gives us like 120% chance to poison on hit with our minions. And of course, we take Pernicious Pact. This is because our minions get so much leech that they can sustain the everlasting poison, which is great. It's wonderful, right? So they'll feel great. This node doesn't really kill your minions that much on this specific build, so you can kind of just spam Dread Shade. The drain drains faster than this does, so we definitely want the poison first, especially because this will scale as we get more res, and it'll make it so they don't die as fast. And of course, we take the usual stuff, the Flesh Harvest, the mana efficiency, the 60% more damage, the usual, right? Then Aura of Decay. Aura of Decay serves 2 functions. First thing off, Poison next patch is really scary. I really don't like Poison next patch. For some reason, it sucks. So we want to take less damage. So this takes 50% less poison damage. And then we have another 20% on top of that. This equals about 60% less poison damage overall, which is great. We have some healing from Absence of Life because we're being a life stacker for reasons I'll talk about in a bit. And then we get Respite, which just gives us a bunch of poison res, which is great because we don't need it on our gear. Poison next patch is very spoopy, so you definitely want this. Then 1 point to Plague Bearers. makes it so that we give minion poison chance, which is great because we want as much generic chance to poison as possible. Then 3 points into infectious bones. The reason why this is important is it makes us, when we're in melee range of our minions, they deal a lot more damage. One problem though is this is bugged right now. It's giving you 150% increased poison damage. It's not giving 150% more. Next patch, they nerfed it. Now it only gives 75% more, but it's actually going to give you 75% more. So it's technically a buff, which is really funny. Yeah, I can show the difference here. So we were at 200k DPS earlier, but then I'm gonna like sit next to my minions with Dreadshade here to, with Aura of Decay to like show the difference here essentially. So I'm gonna sit here, and I'm gonna show you how much damage we do now. About 500k DPS. So Aura of Decay makes a big change because, of course, more poison chance. Obviously, this isn't going to be as high next patch because the minion ailment changes. Expect like 200 to 300 million, 300k or 400k. Don't expect like ridiculous numbers, right? You just need like 200k to do most content in the game, which is great. So yeah, that's pretty much it for those changes. Now for gearing, for passives, this will be down in the description, but mainly we want to grab all the generic chants in the entire tree, the poison chants, the bleed chants. I really like this node. This node helped a lot when I spec'd into it because having that haste means your minions are faster. This node's very important because this doubles the leech that your minions have, so they stay alive longer. This is the extra max skeleton. So we go from 3 max skeletons to 6 because we get +1 from the mastery. Get as much minion life as humanly possible, get as much minion res as humanly possible as well. All of that combined. This ward on death is pretty cool. It helps us a lot in terms of tankiness because we're essentially killing a bunch of minions constantly. And of course, we take 5 points travel into Apocrypha, then 5 points in Serrated Bones. Eventually, we'll have 8 points into this because it's minion bleed chance. It's just so that we can get up to Aura of Decay. And then for this tree, one thing we want to do eventually, once we have more points, because I'm only like level 80 something, we want to get the bleed duration here, and we want to get the poison chance here. Both of these will increase our DPS significantly, which will be wonderful. Now for gearing, what do you need gear-wise? The only thing I would suggest running gear-wise is in a supers mandate early on. That's because as these minions hit, they give us a bunch of life on hit. It is absolutely insane. I could stack to like 3k HP and I would still be essentially getting enough sustain from this. And it scales with your minion attack speed because as you get more minion attack speed, they'll hit more often, which means they'll heal you more often. This allows you to face tank a lot of things, which is really cool. And eventually, when you start building up that chunk, this will allow you to face tank a lot of things. Also, as well, has really common LP on it. You can get a 1 LP one pretty easy, and you can slam minion damage over time on it, which is a gigantic affix as it gives like 200 to 300% increased damage. As you can tell right now, we're only at like 400% increased damage. So this would like give us like 50% more damage if we just slammed it on our supers mandate. So getting an LP1 is insanely strong and it's very easy to do so. Also as well, we want a Jurla's Obsession with the increased melee attack speed affix as we want our minions to be attacking as fast as possible so they clear up stuff as fast as possible. So Jurla's Obsession would help a lot with that. Right now we're just using like whatever pair of gloves. The helmet, nothing too crazy. That bleed effect will turn into 21% bleed pen. Literally does not matter. Literally does not matter. It will be the same exact damage as it was before, so this isn't much of a change. Bleed duration is going to be great as well. Bleed effect here, there'll be pen, bleed chance, that's not changing. Ailment, minion damage, mana regeneration percentage, mana regen. So what I found at 18 mana regen, you can sustain the combo so that you don't have to like stop and run out of mana. You can essentially maintain the combo. As you can tell here, it's going up, 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 and down. As you can tell, neutral amount. That's why we have all this extra mana regen, is so that it pops up when we're finished, right? So that's why we have all this mana regen. Of course, minion health wherever we can get it. We want like about 500 to 600% minion health. 700 to 800% would be ideal because we're not really intelligence stacking with this build right now. We want as much damage as possible, so we're not like as much intelligence as we could be. The boots, just life, res, like same thing with the rune bones. Everything else about this build is pretty casual, pretty cheap. We do like transplant cooldown recovery speed idols. Transplant is being nerfed to 5 seconds of cooldown, but I didn't really talk about it much because it doesn't really matter because we're just grabbing cooldown idols anyways. And like 2 cooldown idols will bring us down from 3.3 seconds to 4 seconds, which is what we had before, which is enough to maintain maximum rates. You can build even more cooldown if you want to do that. But the problem is, one problem with the build is, like I said, with the dummy thing, where like you can only have so many wraiths around the singular target. After 20 or so, it gets a little ridiculous. So it doesn't really matter if you can summon more than 20 wraiths, as they all can't hit the same target. Now it does matter for clear. If you want better clear, build as much cooldown as possible. Run the boots, the stymied fates with cooldown for transplant. Run more cooldown on idols. Run cooldown on your boots and your belt as well. Get all that juicy cooldown all combined, and that means you can spam transplant more than you could have this patch, and it means that of course you can summon more minions because it's kind of our saving grace in terms of summoning, because it means that we don't have to pay the mana for sacrifice, which is the most important thing. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the build. Planner will be down in the description. Have a wonderful rest day wherever you're at, guys. Bye.